So hi, everyone. Welcome to From Local to Global, an overview of 175 years of Smithsonian history. I'm Hannah Byrne, and I'm joined by my co-presenter, Pamela Henson, and we are historians at the Smithsonian. We are responsible for the history of the Smithsonian. We manage the Smithsonian Oral History Program. We work with researchers and educators and work on public projects like the exhibits we'll be sharing and highlighting with you today. So before we get started, just a couple objectives to start out the day. We're going to explore how the bequest of an English scientist who never stepped foot on US soil became one of the largest museum and research complexes in the world. We will explore how the Smithsonian went from what the first secretary called local in effect to an organization with global impact. We'll look at themes and stories shared in two upcoming exhibits related to the 175th anniversary of the Smithsonian. And we'll also be sharing primary sources that can be used in your classrooms. So Pam is going to start us off with our first exhibit, and I'm going to pass it over to her.
Thank you. We are revamping our Smithson to Smithsonian exhibit that we first did for our 150th anniversary in 1996, very early in the internet, so it's a little out of date visually and computer-wise. But we will be now focusing on two Smithsonian part of the exhibit. So the first exhibit really talked a lot about James Smithson and the actual founding of the Smithsonian, the people involved in that. But we are now looking at other content we've developed about who the people are who actually built the Smithsonian once it was founded. And we're going to be looking at people who really changed the history of the Smithsonian, especially through gender and race. So next slide. We have, for example, in our collection, a draft of James Smithson's rather amazing will. And in it, he leaves his fortune to his nephew, but he says if his nephew dies without heirs, which his nephew did, the money should come to the United States to found in Washington under the name of Smithsonian Institution, an organization establishment for the increase and diffusion of knowledge among men, meaning all peoples. And that has been our mission statement since we were founded. Next slide. So we will be talking about people that we didn't know that much about 25 years ago. And one of them is Solomon Gallion Brown. He was the first African-American employee. He worked here from 1850 to 1902 as clerk to the secretary and the assistant secretary. And he was very, very interested in ensuring the Smithsonian was a national museum. He really did a lot to protect the museum. He was self-educated, and once he came to the Smithsonian, he really learned a great deal about science, and he wrote articles in science and philosophy. He wrote poetry, and he really was on the school board, et cetera, quite a figure in Washington, D.C., known as Professor Brown. And we have a lot about him on our website, and we'll be integrating him into this exhibit. Next slide. We'll also be talking about Mary Henry's diary. She was the daughter of the first secretary of the Smithsonian, Joseph Henry. She actually lived in the Smithsonian's iconic castle building. And we have her accounts, for example, of what it was like to live there through the Civil War. And she talked about, we went up to the high tower to see the troops pass over into Virginia. She literally watched the battles. We have her account of hearing about Lincoln's death and a really disastrous fire that occurred in the castle in 1865. And we have this a website online where you can use this in your classroom.
So we're also going to be highlighting this little video here. It's called Smithsonian History for Songwriters. And we thought we'd include this because it was a part of Smithsonian's open access launch in early 2020. Smithsonian Open Access made millions of Smithsonian materials available and for download for free. And so there were a number of projects included for that launch, and this was one of them. And I worked with a group of high school students out in Portland, Oregon, and we worked to share a lot of our resources and archival materials, primary sources, including a lot of the ones Pam just mentioned about Solomon Brown and Mary Henry. And these students use those primary sources to write songs based on Smithsonian history. And let's watch just a little video about that process.
I'll figure it out.
We didn't answer the question. Do we want to work on one song or one subject?
All
or do
of
we
the
want to do
above.
three songs? Okay.
The Smithsonian is sponsoring songwriters to create songs that have to do with the historical founding of the Smithsonian.
The Smithsonian Archive is huge, so I can really just like go in and access anything.
It's really cool to find something that's just from the primary source.
First thing we did was read about like all of these really cool people that none of us really knew much about.
What language is this?
He falls desperately in love. Oh my God.
Several times a month.
Knowledge really gives your like creative flow more
like the relative minor.
You're right. Everything you just said.
We should name the song Perfect Break.
Oh my God.
What can we pull from down here?
You can come up with an idea out of nothing at all. But I think if you do have something to work with, it definitely can help influence like a direction.
Because without information, there's no sustenance of what I'm creating.
I want to read. Said I'm gonna read 1870, being what they never be.
I think my favorite part about the process for this project would have been figuring out the musical aspect, like connecting with those other people and getting to know them musically.
Guys, I have the full song. That's awesome. My Sweet Valentine, you're always on my mind. I was hoping that would be like the...
I really like the recording part of it. I think it's really fun and just like being in a studio. It's not something I'm used to.
Mrs. Hammond, I'll be coming home.
I don't know. Knowledge is power. The Smithsonian Archives gives you access to that.
Solomon Brown, Smithsonian
legend.
Renaissance man like Solomon Brown. Feel like.
So we wanted to share that just as a way to show how these primary sources can be used in fun, educational, and creative ways. And next, Pam is going to tell us a little bit more about who is going to be included in our exhibit.
So one of the people that we're working on is Agnes Chase. I've done a good bit of research on her. She was one of the very early women scientists at the Smithsonian. She was a botanist who studied grasses, but she was many other things: gourmet cook, opera buff, but also a radical. And she was a suffragist. And she was part of the group of women's suffrage that camped themselves out in front of Woodrow Wilson's White House, maintaining a fire of all his speeches that mentioned freedom and liberty, if he would not, while he would not sign the bill for women's suffrage. He was pretty unhappy about them doing that. They were arrested, sent down to the workhouse in Norton, Virginia, essentially jail, and they engaged in a hunger strike, which they kept going, and eventually they were force-fed. The publicity about their force feeding forced Woodrow Wilson to release them and ultimately sign the bill. So after that's over, actually, because she's a government employee, she's threatened with being fired for having been arrested for, the file says, conduct unbecoming a government employee. However, her boss basically said, you can't fire her. I need her. I can't run the division without her. So she actually continued to work. She came in the 1890s and she was with us until 1963. So quite a long time. And then also we have another employee, Barry Hampton. And you see him to the right. He joined the museum staff in 1912 as a mail clerk, but he was very interested in reptiles and amphibians. And so in 1926, he managed to move to the Division of Reptiles and Batrachians, assisting the curator, Doris Cochrane, who you see to the left. However, as was standard at the Smithsonian and in the federal government, he was classified as an unskilled laborer, not a museum aide, because he was African American. If you were white, he would have been classified as a museum aide. So he put up with this for a long time because he loved the work, and he really was an expert on snakes. He took care of the collections. Cochrane often traveled to collect specimens. He ran the division while she was out of town. So eventually he is tired of not being given the right title for his job, and he files a grievance towards the end of his career. And at first he's ignored, but he finally gets reclassified in the late 40s, shortly before he retires in 54. And he is classified as a scientific aide. And this meant everything to him. The Washington Post article when he retired says, Barry Hampton, snake expert, scientific aide, describes how he did scientific work at the Smithsonian. And that's what he wanted. He wanted people to understand that he didn't sweep the hallways. He did really interesting and valuable scientific work. They had to really fight for that credit in that time period.
So we're also really excited to include stories we've collected with video oral history interviews with a group of Black aviators. So this is an oral history collection at the archives, and it is a group that was working in the 1920s, Black aviators working in the 1920s. So for reference, this was before the Tuskegee Airmen. And it's an incredible set of interviews. And this right here is Janet Harmon Bragg. She was the first Black woman to get her commercial pilot's license in the US. And I'm going to share just a quick clip, one, because it's just an incredible interview, but also to show the importance of this collection and the importance and value of first-person narratives.
So I went back after I passed the written, and we started all over again and things. So now the day arrived for when the man said, they always said the man is coming, you know who we were talking about then. He came down that afternoon. It was just after a rain, and the air was just kind of heavy, just like silk. It was just beautiful. And they all said, Janet, get in the plane and just relax and everything. So we adorned our parachutes. He did his own, I'm mine on. Okay, we took off. And he pulled a false landing. And the same place where the kids had told me where he's going to pull it. So, okay, let's climb up and doing different maneuvers as we got up and went through spins and everything. And that little plane, everybody had their own plane. And it seemed like you could talk to it, or it would talk to you. You merged right into a plane. Just the feeling you get. And I knew that little old plane was doing everything for me. Coming down, we landed. So happy. There was Ray and the rest of the instructors was there, came out to see, and Chief came over and said, how did you do, Mr. Hudson? Well, Chief, I tell you, she did very well. I'll put up against any of your instructors. I've never given a colored girl a commercial pilot license. I don't intend to. And we all stood there and looked at each other, And Chief didn't know, well, I think he was so dumbfounded, he didn't know what to say. Chief would cry in a minute, I think tears were coming out of his eyes. So finally I said, well, that's all right, we do. Now, if he had said she needs to work on her spins, you need to do this maneuver or something that was different. But he didn't say anything was wrong with me, fine. But he wasn't going to give me a commercial power license because I was a black woman. So it was pretty sad for all of us.
So we share that collection because it's really popular. We get a lot of use. A lot of educators reach out wanting to use excerpts of the transcript or the video. And we're always happy to share that collection. And our email address will be at the end of this presentation if you're interested. We're also planning to feature a collection of stories from staff at the 1996 Folklife Festival out on the Mall. So for the 150th anniversary in 1996, we're celebrating 175th this year, but back in 1996, when we could all gather in large groups, they had a Smithsonian Memories tent on the Mall, collecting short form oral history interviews, about 20 to 30 minutes with staff and Smithsonian community members. This collection is at the archives, and it has incredible stories from Smithsonian staff that not only tell the history of their life at the Smithsonian, their career trajectories, but also a really rich history of life in Washington, D.C., and the experience of different people at the Smithsonian, the experience of African-American employees, Latinx employees, and LGBTQ+ employees. So it's a really incredible collection, and they really do provide kind of life stories to listen to and learn from. And the Smithsonian also has robust oral history collections at organizations across the institution. And we will be providing a link to those collections as well, and resources at the end of this. And we'll also include resources on how your students could conduct oral history interviews. And next, Pam is going to talk about our next exhibit.
So we are doing a banner exhibit on women at the Smithsonian. It will be in the castle first in this great hall, and then it will move when the castle closes for renovation. We also hope to put it online. Exhibit has the stories of 33 women at the Smithsonian who've had a significant impact. And the content in the exhibit and others that we share today could be useful for lessons in women's history, also African-American history, Latinx history, and just learning from first-person narratives. So we're going to talk about some of these women we're featuring, and Hannah's going to go next.
So we're planning to include Adela Gomez, pictured here on the left. Adela Gomez was a Panamanian administrator at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute in Panama, which is one of the leading research institutes for the study of tropical biology around the world. Gomez ended her career at STRI as a special assistant to the director in 1984, but started in the 1940s, a year before even the station was brought under the umbrella of the Smithsonian, when it was a small research station with just her and a couple other people, to what it is. And she was critical to its development from then until when she retired, and even critical to its survival at times. Her story is one that's a little bit lesser known, but when you talk to people who worked at STRI during this era and even today, there's a lore around Gomez about her role and her impact. And her story touches on the history of women at the Smithsonian, Latinx history, the Smithsonian's relationship with colonialism, and more. And so we have research, including blogs on Gomez. We have letters that she wrote and letters written between her and leaders of the administration. We also have oral history interviews from other Latin American women that she hired and mentored. And they provide a really interesting study of memory and how we remember women in the workplace. We're also going to be highlighting Louisa Bernie Gallagher, but we'll call her Bernie, whose photographic work was a long time attributed to the work of the Smithsonian's first photographer, Thomas Smiley. So Bernie was Thomas Smiley's ward. That's how she got the job in the photographic laboratory. Nepotism was a tool often used by white women to find employment in the 19th century. So she got this job at the photographic laboratory, and she was actively working But a lot of her work was attributed to Smiley in our records. And so now, thanks to the work of some incredible photo archivists, we can now correctly attribute a lot of the work that Bernie Gallagher did to her instead of Smiley. And we can call her the first woman photographer at the Smithsonian. So we have blog posts about this. We also have the photos, records of the photos that she actually took. And her story is one that can really help illuminate lessons about women working in the 19th century, and also the erasure from women's history in records and how we can work to fix that. And lastly, Pam is going to talk about a really incredible woman in Smithsonian history.
And this is one of my more favorite people I've gotten to know in my years at the Smithsonian, Janine Smith Clark. She was a major part of the Smithsonian for almost 60 years, 63 to 2020 when she died. But she was always a volunteer at the Smithsonian. She was never employed here. She came here in 1963 to volunteer because you had Resurrection City next to the Washington Monument. This was part of the Poor People's March on Washington, and there were families there in tents with their children demonstrating for more equal pay. And she wanted, being an educator, she wanted to start doing tours in the Smithsonian museums, which were right next door, for these children. But she never did interest in the Smithsonian in that, but they got her to start doing tours, especially of the Africa Hall. But she very quickly moved out beyond that and became really central to the Smithsonian during a period of cultural change in the 60s and 70s. She was an activist in the city of Washington and at the Smithsonian, a change agent. She just made life different. She insisted on more diverse culture in our exhibits, in our programming, and in our staff. And she was so influential that she was actually the first volunteer put on the Smithsonian Board of Regents, which is our governing board. And these are usually very important people, wealthy people, corporate CEOs, and she is on the board, and they put her in charge of changing the culture of the Smithsonian. She's chairing a committee to do this, and she did. She was quite something. And she was actually also, so we interviewed her in SI archives, but the Anacostia Community Museum and the National Museum of African American History and Culture have also interviewed her because she was also so active in the city of Washington and nationally that you have these three separate interviews focusing on completely different aspects of her life. She was such a strong woman. And I think we have another picture of her here. We can show you. There we go. And so this is the first Regents meeting she gets to, and we're going to play a little excerpt and you can read along to it.
I remember when I went aboard the Board of Regents in 1983 for my first term, our Chief Justice conducted our meetings. It was Warren Berger at the time. And I'm one of those old-fashioned people who tries desperately to keep time. And I parked beside the castle and ran up the front steps to make an 8 o'clock meeting time when a guard stopped me. And I didn't park on the lot, come to think of it. At that time, I parked right in front of the building, and a guard stopped me and said, "You can't park here." I said, "But I'm going to the Board of Regents meeting." "I don't care where you're going," he shouted at me. And I ran up the steps from him and went charging through the door of the Board of Regents room. You could have heard a pin drop. Without thinking, I said, "The guard wouldn't let me in."
So she managed to get into that Regents meeting, her first one, and she really was on for an extended period of time and had tremendous influence on the direction the Smithsonian was going and was so dedicated. She was on the boards of the Post Museum, the Portrait Gallery, and a costume museum. She was so involved, so deeply engaged in all aspects of the Smithsonian. So one of her really beloved souls that we really treasure.
Before we end, I just want to share where some resources that will be available to you. So there will be this PowerPoint. We are also going to share a document with resources that we've shared here today, along with materials and collections from across the Smithsonian that we were not able to fit into today's presentation. And if you have questions, here are email addresses. Email us. The bottom one, sihistory@si.edu, is the best way to reach us if you have questions or want to request any materials. And lastly, we just want to say thank you for taking the time to listen today. And now we're going to turn it over to y'all for questions that you can enter in the Q&A box. Thank you.
Hi, Hannah. Someone did ask a question saying someone would like to know if they can listen to the songs that the youth created.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And in the resource page, there will be a links to all of those. They're on SoundCloud. If you look up Bodecker Foundation, I can put it in the chat as well. That will there you can listen to them. They're incredible songs. The one about Solomon Brown is my favorite that they played at the end there. And yes, they're free online, and we'll send out those links. Let's see. Any other questions? Let's see. So I see many questions coming in. So we just want to say thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure to share these upcoming exhibits with you, and we hope to hear from you if you have any questions about any of the resources we shared. And
Hannah, I'm so sorry to interrupt. We do have one additional question.
Okay.
Is it difficult as all becomes more data driven to appreciate the reality of the museum?
Well, we find people are really happy to have digital surrogates online, but there's nothing like the experience of coming in and seeing the real artwork, looking up and getting the size sense of a real dinosaur skeleton, of seeing our animals at the National Zoo. Even if you go out to the Advarhati Center to see the space shuttle, I mean, the enormous size of that, and you can compare it with the little tiny planes that those black aviators were flying early on. And it's really quite, people interact with the real objects. To see Lincoln's hat that he was wearing the night he was shot, there's just something different about engaging in the real thing that we find that people still flock to the museums if they can. But the problem is we want to reach a far wider audience. We have lots of programs in schools in the District of Columbia region, but we can't reach all teachers. Try as hard as we can to get things that we hope will be useful in your classroom in digital format online.
Pam, we have another question. Is the Smithsonian History Division a future article in the Smithsonian Magazine? And I think I'll leave that over to you because we contribute, or you're asked a lot about things for the magazine.
I help the magazine all the time. I mean, so they don't write about us per se, but a lot of the articles that they write, they come to us for background information, especially the online magazine. So yes, and we have a wonderful oral history collection that's a lot of fun for us to actually compile, because Smithsonian has very interesting, sometimes very quirky workers, and we get to interview them. People have worked at the Smithsonian as long as 78 years, if you can begin to imagine that. We had one employee who actually worked here for 78 years. We have two others who worked here 75 years. 50 to 60 years is not unusual at the Smithsonian. And you just don't have places where people come and never go, but they don't never want to leave their collections. They love being here so much. So when you can interview somebody in 1973 and ask them about what it was like at the Smithsonian when they came here in 1895, it's very different than somebody who's been at your organization for 5 years. And, you know, they do field work, they travel the globe, they collect things, and they do the strangest jobs you can imagine, but they have fun doing it. And so it's really kind of a fun collection to us.
Pam, we have another question. Do you have materials related to early visitors to the museum and their experiences?
Yes, we do. And one of them is online. It's a history of the Smithsonian through postcards. And we have both the front and back of the postcards if they're written on. And we also do have in our bibliography travelogues of people who came to Washington and talked about their visits to Washington. So the postcards will be like, you know, writing from DC, the museum was great, or, you know, skip the museums, did something else, but you at least see what people are doing, where they're from, who they're writing to. And then the travelogues and the diaries are really a lot of fun. So we have a sense of who these people are. We have lots of photographs of early visitors. And they wrote to the Smithsonian. We have some very large collections of letters that would come in from people who had visited the Smithsonian and then had questions for us. And unlike many museums, the Smithsonian, with one exception of in New York, has never charged admission. And there have never been any restrictions on coming to the museum. So it's quite different. If you have, you know, a family with 5 children, you can afford to go to the different Smithsonian museums because you don't have to pay entrance fees for each one. And so that people who live near the zoo or near the museums, they come and go all the time. It's part of their local culture. So it's always been more and more open place than some of the other big museums that you'll see, especially in Europe, where admission was very restricted, or, you know, places like New York, where it's fairly expensive to go to a museum.
We have another one. Working so closely with the archives, is there anything that you've seen that surprised you or shocked you?
Yeah, oh yeah. One that we've been working on is a letter about the station in Panama, written in the 1920s when it's really just getting organized. And it's written by a fairly wealthy man who is one of the sponsors of the station. And he's heard that they may want to build one of the little dormitory buildings for women scientists to come study. And it's this letter on why women should not be allowed on that island to disturb sort of the brotherhood and fellowship of male scientists working together. And it opens that he loves his wife as well as any man, and he goes into all the ways in which women disturb the peace and quiet and lower the intellectual level. And it's kind of what women who write about women in science say went on. But really, if ever, do you see it written out in a letter like this? So I basically was so shocked when I found this. But also, you see people going really out of their way to help the Smithsonian. At one point we had an animal, a primate that was very sick at the zoo, and children were sending in their pennies to pay for an oxygen tent for him. That people would care that much. So, and we're always surprised at the gifts that show up on our doorstep. Can you give some examples of those?
Well, I was thinking about all the things that Smokey Bear received when he was at the zoo. He actually received so much mail that they had to create his own zip code for him because he received so much mail from kids across the country. And so that's always one that really stuck with me, all of the gifts to Smokey.
And we have many gifts that we've never asked for. We have an environmental research station along the Chesapeake Bay. This man who owned a dairy farm there wrote in his will he was leaving it to us to do whatever we wanted with the land. It's in a great spot for an environmental station. And we found out about that donation after he died. He never discussed it with us. And we'll get gifts like that we're like, we don't always take all the gifts that we get. Some we just can't take, but things come our way in surprising ways, and we're not expecting them. And then we have to figure out how we're going to deal with this particular thing or item.
No, unless anyone has any more questions, I'm not seeing many more come through. But we're happy to stay and answer if you have any, but if not, we have really enjoyed sharing these exhibits with you. And we hope it was helpful, and please remember to take the survey after this. It was great to share virtual space with all of you today. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.